Imagine a city block in 1900s Manhattan. Beneath the clamor of trolleys and the shadow of new skyscrapers lay a secret so profound it could rewrite history. A ghost town buried not by time, but by a sudden, catastrophic choice. This isn't just a story about ambition, it's about a hidden geography, a silent, submerged world that still influences every New Yorker's life today. Are you ready to see the invisible city? The year was 1905, and New York City was a symphony of chaos and ambition played out on a stage of steel and stone. The air was thick with coal smoke, the scent of the nearby harbor, and the electric hum of a metropolis expanding faster than anyone could chart it. But in the rapidly gentrifying West Village, specifically the area surrounding what is now Christopher Street and 7th Avenue South, there existed a strange anomaly. A quiet, stubborn pocket of colonial-era streets that refused to conform to the city's relentless grid. This area, known locally as Greenwich Village, had been established long before the 1811 Commissioner's Plan laid out the famous uniform north-south, east-west grid that defined modern Manhattan. While the rest of the island succumbed to the ruthless geometry of the grid, a masterwork of efficient, monotonous planning, the village maintained its charming, bewildering colonial-era street pattern, crooked, narrow alleys like Bleecker, Charles, and especially the meandering, diagonal thoroughfare known as Skunk's Alley. Our story centers on Elias Thorne, a cartographer with an almost obsessive love for the city's unseen history. Elias wasn't interested in the towering new MetLife Tower or the rush for subway tunnels. His fascination lay with the city's deep memory, the buried bones of its earlier self. He worked for the Department of Public Works, a job that afforded him access to dusty, forgotten blueprints and maps predating the Civil War. His current obsession was the looming Great Street Straightening, a massive public works project designed to ram the new 7th Avenue straight through the heart of the village, connecting the booming commercial districts of Midtown to the residential prosperity of Chelsea. The official plans were drawn in clean, confident lines, depicting the new avenue as a surgical incision, a 2-mile-long, 100-foot-wide swath of progress. But Elias saw the truth behind the lines. The new avenue wasn't just connecting 2 points, it was annihilating a third. It was designed to carve a perfect, unstoppable diagonal through the existing organic streetscape, and in doing so, it would create an engineering and social phenomenon, the ghost grid. Elias was a frequent visitor to a small, unassuming map shop on what was then simply Grove Street. The proprietor, an elderly woman named Mrs. Kestner, had inherited a collection of Dutch and English colonial maps that Elias considered priceless. One afternoon, amidst the scrolls and the smell of aged parchment, Elias traced the proposed path of 7th Avenue on a pre-grid map. "Look, Mrs. Kestner," he whispered, his finger running a shaky line across the paper. "They're not just widening a street, they're killing a neighborhood. And worse, look at what they're doing here at the junction with what will be Varick Street." The intersection was a mess of acute angles and short, confusing blocks. Due to the perfect geometric incompatibility of the existing colonial grid and the new commissioner's grid, the construction of 7th Avenue and the simultaneous extension of Varick Street would not just intersect, they would overlap, creating dozens of triangular or trapezoidal parcels of land too small to build on and too awkward to navigate. "They'll be forced to condemn and wipe out almost everything on the west side of this new line," Mrs. Kestner said, sadly, adjusting her spectacles. "But that is the cost of progress, Mr. Thorne." "No," Elias countered, his voice firm. "The cost of poor planning. They're ignoring the geometry. They're going to create entire blocks that will exist only on paper, on the old deeds. Blocks of space that will suddenly become inaccessible, or worse, so shallow that they can only support slivers of buildings. Think of the buildings they're literally going to chop in half, the property lines they're vaporizing." He pointed to a specific block, a solid rectangle on the old map. The new street lines cut through it diagonally, leaving a tiny, perfect triangular remainder at the corner. "This piece," he said, tapping the spot. This corner would be physically separated from the rest of the block by a 100-foot-wide street. It will become an island of land, barely 2 feet deep at its tip, yet still an official property line. This was the genesis of the ghost grid, the forgotten properties, the submerged street names, and the bizarre geometrically mutilated land remnants that the Great Straightening was about to leave in its wake. Elias started compiling his own atlas, a ghost map charting the condemned homes, the street segments that would cease to exist, and the impossibly small land fragments that the city engineers, in their haste for a perfect grid, had simply overlooked or deemed insignificant. He was documenting a vanishing. The demolition began in 1913. The village, known for its intellectual and bohemian residents, put up a fierce but ultimately futile resistance. Historic taverns, centuries-old homes, and the tight-knit social fabric of the colonial streets were sacrificed for the modern god of efficiency. The sound of sledgehammers and dynamite became the new soundtrack of the West Side. Elias Thorne, now working almost solely on his secret ghost map, walked the condemned areas daily, documenting the exact moment a street sign came down or a century-old foundation was cracked open. He watched, horrified, as the diagonal line of 7th Avenue South cleaved through existing structures. The city, armed with the power of eminent domain, paid out compensation for the property it condemned. But the engineering challenge, as Elias had predicted, was not just about buying and destroying, it was about the leftovers. When the steamrollers finally cleared the path for the new avenue, what was revealed was a geometrical nightmare. In certain blocks, the perfect angle of the new street, 7th Avenue South, meeting the near-perfect angle of the extended street, Varick Street, created pockets of private property that were utterly unusable. At the convergence point, the city's engineers had carefully marked the official, legally defined property lines, which now stood in stark, confusing contrast to the 1811 grid that governed the north-south streets. One block, in particular, became the subject of whispered legends among the construction crews. It was a triangular remnant of the old streetscape, situated at the southeast corner where 7th Avenue South and Varick Street met Christopher Street. The official survey map showed a tiny, acute triangle of land, a forgotten piece of Block 645, Lot 143. Its base was perhaps 25 feet, but its long, tapering sides ran to a point that was less than 2 feet wide. It was, legally, a private lot. The city had condemned the major building on that lot, a 5-story apartment complex. But when the dust settled, that impossibly small triangular remnant remained, still legally owned by the property owner, a German immigrant named David Hess. The city's surveyors had simply missed it, or perhaps deemed it too insignificant to bother with the bureaucratic process of condemnation, assuming it would simply be absorbed by the sidewalk construction. The Hess family's stand. David Hess, furious over the low compensation he received for his apartment building, saw the tiny sliver of land as his last stand against the overwhelming power of the city. When the city's contractor began pouring concrete for the sidewalk that would cover the small triangular piece of land, Elias Thorne, who was observing from across the street, saw an elderly man emerge from the rubble. That man was Hess. Hess carried 2 things, a crude sign and a small pouch of cement. He planted the sign on the tiny triangular dirt. It read in bold, shaky German script, "This property belongs to the Hess family and no one else." Then, in a desperate, almost symbolic act, Hess and his family poured their own cement mixture onto the minuscule property, carefully constructing a small, mosaic-tiled triangle. It wasn't a building, it was an act of architectural protest.
It was an assertion of private property rights so extreme, so geometrically absurd, that it forced the city to stop the sidewalk construction. The city's legal department scoffed. They argued that the property was an obstacle to public works and the sidewalk, but the Hess family had the deeds, and the legal description, however small and ludicrous, was unassailable. The triangle was legally theirs. The only way the city could take it was through another formal eminent domain process, which would be a bureaucratic and public relations nightmare over a 500-square-inch piece of land. The standoff ended with a quiet, unofficial surrender by the city. The sidewalk was simply poured around the little triangle. The triangle's legacy. The construction concluded, and the new 7th Avenue South and Varick Street roared to life. The old streets were gone, buried beneath the asphalt, their ghosts existing only in the deeds and the memories of the oldest residents. But Elias Thorne's ghost map was complete. It documented not only the now vanished properties, but more importantly, the dozens of other triangular and sliver-shaped remnants that were too small to hold a building, yet remained legally distinct lots, forcing the new buildings along the avenue to be built in impossibly narrow, wedge-like shapes that adhered to the bizarre new property lines. The most famous, of course, was the Hessian Triangle. It still stands today, embedded in the sidewalk at the corner of Christopher Street and 7th Avenue South, a small, stubborn metal plaque containing a defiant message, now faded but clearly legible: property of the Hess estate, which has never been dedicated for public use. It is the smallest piece of private property in New York City, a constant, physical reminder of the city's ruthless ambition and the small, stubborn acts of resistance against the grid. It is the visible tip of Elias Thorne's ghost map, proving that below the clean lines of the commissioner's plan, the old, messy human geography of the village still holds a grip. Elias Thorne died in the 1940s, his ghost map tucked away in a trunk, a document dismissed by the city as the fanciful obsession of a retired clerk. But the invisible geometry he charted continued to haunt Manhattan's modern life, proving that you can pave over the past, but you can't erase its angles. The geometric incompatibility of the two grids, the colonial streets and the 1811 plan, didn't just result in the Hessian Triangle. It resulted in the creation of the most uniquely shaped, bizarrely angled apartment buildings in the world. Take, for example, the block north of the triangle, where the new 7th Avenue diagonally shaves off a huge chunk of the grid. Because the property owners fought fiercely for every last inch of their land, the resulting buildings were constructed to fit the exact boundaries of the remaining lots. This created the famous Flatiron buildings of the village, apartment buildings that are only 2 or 3 rooms wide at their base, but taper off to a sharp, knife-like edge at the corner, often less than 5 feet across. These aren't architectural whims, they are monuments to legal battles, built on the slivers of land that the Great Straightening failed to condemn. Every time a modern New Yorker is surprised by a triangular apartment with a window looking out onto 2 converging avenues, they are experiencing the direct result of Elias Thorne's ghost map. The unusual, chaotic layout of the subway lines beneath the village is also a consequence. Engineers in the 1910s and 1920s had to weave the subterranean tracks not just around the foundations of existing buildings, but around the impossibly narrow and deep pilings of the wedge-shaped ghost properties, creating strange, curving tunnels that diverge sharply from the rest of the city's straight-line subway routes. The power of a sliver. The Hessian Triangle, though, remains the most powerful symbol of this architectural haunting. It is often vandalized, cleaned, and repaved, but its defiant inscription always returns. It is a tiny, physical manifestation of the most profound difference between American progress and European history. While many Old World cities grew organically with crooked, ancient streets, New York tried to impose a rational geometric order. The triangle is where that rational order broke down. It serves as a constant, silent reminder to the millions of people who walk past it every day that even the most meticulously planned, aggressively modern city cannot completely erase the past. A single stubborn sliver of land, measuring 27.5 inches on its longest side, holds the power to disrupt a city's perfect geometry and remind everyone that history is not just in monuments and museums. Sometimes it's right beneath your feet, carved into the very sidewalk. Elias Thorne's ghost map proved that the village is less a neighborhood built on a grid and more a network of secret, submerged territories, the forgotten angles of the past still governing the present. The next time you walk the streets of Greenwich Village, look closely at the acute angles, the sudden jogs in the road, and the impossibly narrow buildings. You are walking through the ghost grid, the physical legacy of a historic protest that began with a property owner, a pouch of cement, and a defiant, tiny triangle of land. The next time you are near Christopher Street, seek out the smallest piece of private property in New York. Stand on the corner of the Hessian Triangle and consider what invisible histories are buried beneath the ground where you live.